haven't read the plan and I haven't read any of the research, but the one that quite, they seem to say, if you increase education, one of the wonderful side effects is that there is a lower dependency or a lower number of children that people have. And surely that's part of the whole mix, and I fully agree with the dreadful inequality and the poverty. My MBA research many years ago was about the racial wage gap and how abominable that was, which hopefully has improved somewhat since then. So I'm just asking, shouldn't we be really putting education at the center of discussions on how we're actually going to solve many of the other problems in the longer term? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So from Occupy to Too Much Politics.
Thanks again, some very provocative and interesting questions. On Mohammed's question, you know, I think the left and communities around the world are grappling for solutions. You know, you talk about Occupy, you talk about Europe, you know, we talk about various parts of the world, but what people don't look at is Latin America. You know, Latin America are not talking, they're doing things. You know, Latin America is making massive strides in eradicating poverty, inequality, creating employment. I've studied in detail the Latin American experience, including Brazil, where they've created 17 million jobs in 10 years. You know, eradicated extreme poverty in many areas, reduced the level of inequality, and massively increased the level of real wages, particularly the national minimum wage, which has increased by 70% in real terms in about 7 or 8 years. So there are concrete solutions, and in a funny way, I agree with the comment about too much politics. You know, I think we've got to get down to a serious engagement around a development model which presents alternatives, not rehash the old discredited ideas which have got the rest of Europe into such deep trouble. So I think that's one of the issues that COSATU is trying to do, is to begin to center the debate and to say, what are the alternatives? I was at a meeting yesterday in Durban of economists who are trying to look at an alternative development model. I don't know if people are familiar with the MERG, the Macroeconomic Research Group, which put forward proposals in about 1993. It's sort of trying to take that forward 20 years later to say what it needs to be done specifically in all these areas. And I think that's one very important thing that we need to do. But secondly, we need to have these discussions on a much broader level. People need to be aware that there are alternatives out there. Not only are there alternatives out there, but the South African government and Treasury in particular is lagging light years behind thinking in other parts of the world. I really recommend to people that they read the UNCTAD, the United Nations Trade and Development Report from 2013, in which they look at the role of the financial sector internationally and measures that can be taken to regulate the financial sector. And their heading, the whole focus of their work is channeling investment into the real economy. Channeling investment into the real economy. That should almost be our sort of watchword. And that relates to the debate, the question about skills. Because you can have as much skills and as much education and training as you like. Unless investment is being channeled into the real economy, those skills are really not going to be used. Skills and education are critical, we agree, and I'll come back to why that's the case. But you've got to have a sophisticated or a proper combination of supply side and demand side measures. You've got to be able to generate industrial policies which transform the nature of your industry. We know what those are, you know, things like leveraging local procurement, promoting beneficiation, building our manufacturing sector, leveraging our state-owned enterprises to promote investment in the productive sector. But critically, regulation of capital to stop this massive capital flight that has taken place from South Africa and the massive stealing of South African resources, which were produced under repressive apartheid conditions pre-1994, have now just been taken en masse offshore. And of course we've got these huge diversion of resources through things like tax havens, where companies are basically refusing to pay their share of the tax. So on all these issues there are concrete proposals. On the issue of skills and education, really recommend that people look at the COSATU growth path for full employment document, because it makes a very simple point that if you've got how many million unemployed youth from 18 to 23, someone here will have that figure at the tip of their fingers, but it's a massive number. If you've got those youth, 18 to 23, in the labour market, swelling the ranks of the unemployed, when they could be in higher education, in tertiary institutions, and those skills strategies being linked to your broader strategy of economic restructuring, then you have a fundamentally different economic and labour market profile. So it has a range of implications, but then there needs to be a strategy, and there needs to be a strategy to properly resource and restructure our tertiary sector. So that relates to Mario's question also about skills and education. And the common vision of the NDP, as we've said, it's good in parts, but it's very problematic in others. And if the core of your development plan, the economy, is wrong, then you're just on the wrong track. So we've got to fix that now. We can't just say we're going to live with a vision, no matter how problematic it is. And unfortunately, Mario, the bad news is that the research you did on the wage gaps pre-apartheid, we've done a lot of work subsequent to that, and I can give you a paper that we produced last year, looking at the labour market, precisely relating to what Jane says, is those wage gaps and the levels of inequality are increasing, they're not decreasing. So that is the harsh reality that we're sitting with, and the proposals of the NDP would make that worse. So we need to address that. I hope I've dealt with the questions, and I'm happy to engage with anybody afterwards if I haven't answered issues that you want to raise.
Thanks very much, Neil. If there are any really, really burning final questions or comments, we can just got room for 2 more. So that's 1. Anyone else? And that's 2. 1 and 2. There we go.
Burning.
Thank you very much. I'm Kimani Ndungu. One question quickly and one comment. And the question to Neil, if he's noting this, is this, Neil, all right, thanks. Is this criticism against, in the paper here and in your slides there, that SMMEs do not create sufficient employment in terms of comparison? But that's a long-going and old and ongoing debate whether we can get lots of jobs out of SMMEs or from industrial expansion, and in particular manufacturing. And if you read lots of papers and lots of research, there's a contestation around those 2 paradigms. But what would be important would be to, for example, get a sense of the research that you cite done by 2 academics at UCT in passing. What is the comparator? Is it the West? Is it industrialized economies? Or is it the developing South? For example, you were the author last year of the famous document from which you got the Lula moment phrase, and you did a lot of focus on Brazil. What about SMMEs in Brazil? Where did the 17 million jobs come from in Brazil? Was it from industrialization? Was it from an expansion in manufacturing, or SMMEs? And then secondly and quickly, the issue of services. Over the last about quarter century, we have had a dramatic shift from the primary sectors to the tertiary sector. So it's not surprising that by and large, if you look at our economy over the last maybe 10 years, including between 2003 and 2007, when the rate of growth was so high comparatively, the services sector was the largest creator of employment. Look, it's not the best sector, but it seems to be a trend around the world. And I think with the exception of China, into which manufacturing has shifted, then there's no other economy that one can say we have the primary and secondary sectors creating jobs or expanding. Thank you.
No, that's side.
Ziko Tamela from Zadao. Comrade Neil, can you say something on the infrastructure rollout, particularly the notion that rollout of infrastructure, particularly in transport, will have multiplier effects on the economy, and that will create part of the jobs that will be created will be coming from that aspect of development.
Thanks. Maybe I'll deal with that last question first, because it's very focused, and the other one's very broad. So the infrastructure rollout is a critical element of the IPAP, and obviously of the infrastructure plan that is being coordinated by the PICC. And in fact, this was an issue we were debating with the economists yesterday, as to what the impact would be of the infrastructure rollout and what the vision is of the infrastructure rollout, because it's quite contested at the moment. Massive impact, potentially, because we're talking about the state actually harnessing both its national budget as well as the budgets of state-owned enterprises, DFIs, etc., to roll this infrastructure out, but more importantly, a vision which links the infrastructure rollout to a vision of local procurement and the production of local goods and equipment. And the example that you give is very important because, one of the major projects is to procure South African-produced rolling stock, carriages, etc., for the railways, instead of importing these things. And the Minister of Trade, Industry and Economic Development, I think, are working very hard to try and develop an overarching strategy. The problem is, up until now, we've had too much of a piecemeal sort of approach, with Treasury constantly sniping and undermining the vision and this agenda. So this contestation between different centres of economic power within government also will have a profound effect, even on the question of the infrastructure rollout. But definitely, it has massive economic potential. And if you can imagine, if the 3 trillion rand of workers' retirement funds in the GEPF and in the private sector was also harnessed to a certain extent to promote that rollout and other areas of social investment, we're talking about a massive boost to employment, but it has to take place within a coherent strategy and framework. And I think that is beginning to happen. So this is one of the sad things about the NDP debate, is it takes us back. We said the headline of this talk was radical shift or radical regression. I'm saying it's a radical regression. We've made so many important gains since 2007 in certain areas of government policy, and what we're finding now is we're being dragged back. We're being dragged back into old debates, which are undermining the extent of progress. But not only that, it's also undermining the cohesion and the strength of the progressive forces in the country. Because the divisions in COSATU at the moment, for example, are not unrelated to the contradictions and the struggles that are taking place within society and within the ANC around this vision of where do we go as a society. So it's a long, slightly more complicated answer, but I think it is unfortunately tied to politics, as someone was asking. And then Kimani comes in with a killer blow at the end of the at the end of the discussion, which is really the subject of a new seminar. But I think we do address that issue, Kimani. I'd encourage people to look at the study by the UCT economists. They actually did the study with maybe he's the chief economist, but he's a deputy director general in Stats SA. The comparator is South Africa. So it's an internal study. They're looking at the trajectory and the trends over time. But they're saying the NDP, they actually say this, they say the NDP suggests that we can create these 9.9 million jobs based on past performance. It's not going to happen. Now, of course, they're fairly conservative economists. We don't necessarily share their views on every aspect of it. The question that you can legitimately ask is, well, what would create a vibrant, small SMME sector? And I think that's also a challenge for the labour movement and the progressive movement more generally, is what is our vision of SMME development, which promotes decent work, which promotes sort of cutting-edge investment, etc., etc. The sort of Italian type model of SMMEs, where SMMEs aren't equivalent to low-wage, sweatshop type employment. There are many other models of SMMEs internationally. So our argument is not to say that SMMEs are hopeless, we don't want SMMEs, whatever. We're just saying the vision of the NDP is completely wrong on that particular issue. We need an alternative vision of SMME development. But you remember the slide where I said the dynamic multiplier effects of the manufacturing sector are very, very important. You know, even if you look at macroeconomic issues like balance of payments, you know, we are importing capital and intermediate goods, in other words, machinery and equipment and other goods from other parts of the world. We're exporting our raw materials. Not only does that make us a very warped and distorted economy, but it also creates massive balance of payment problems, current account deficits, macroeconomic imbalances that no country can develop on that basis of continuing the old style colonial relationships. So those colonial relationships have to be changed. Yes, manufacturing is not going to absorb all our employed. Yes, services is very important, but it can't be a services-driven, services-centered economy, which is based, as it is now, on low-paid, insecure work in the call centers, in the security sector, based on contracting out, labor broking. That's what the model we've got now. Yes, atypical work is on the rise, but if you look at the Brazilian experience was that those 17 million jobs they created was actually combined, very interestingly, with a formalization of the economy. They actually brought many, many people into the formal economy. So it wasn't in the precarious areas of work, etc. What is true